Tustin Area Historical Society President, Joe Spreckelmeyer, who for some time now has served as our chairman of educational programs for Tustin area youngsters. So I'm going to let Joe introduce his henchmen to you as the program unfolds.
Good evening. My name is Joe Spreckelmeyer, and this is Margaret Pottinger, the Queen of Tustin. She's going to be talking about what it's like to be a Tustin farmer's wife. And this is Lori Loverett, and she's going to be talking about what it was like to be an elementary school teacher 150 years ago. And then Don's going to be talking about being a Tustin farmer. We did this a couple of years ago at the library before it was flooded, and we appreciate you being back again. When Gary talked to me about this, I was very pleased and happy that to do this, because I know some of you have not seen this before, and we just wanted to show you some of the things that we do at the museum, part of the Historical Society. In our educational programs, we have the history in a box. It's a trunk that's filled with artifacts from years and years ago, like what we're going to show you here, an old washboard, the Guppy readers. Then we have the museum tours. We have the third graders come in. It is the only time in third grade that a student who goes through the Tustin school system gets any Tustin history, and it's in third grade. And that's why we concentrate our efforts at that grade level. And we have the Joanne Bollison Art Contest coming up. Matter of fact, we just have made up the requirements and it's ready to go. And I am pleased with the Bollison family for providing the funds for this. The winner gets $120. Second place is $100. Third place is $80. And then we have 4 honorable mentions at $25 a piece. So I appreciate the Bollison family providing those funds. And then we have the Mobile Museum. We call ourselves the M&Ms. So what I would like for you to do, we appreciate it if you would let all 4 of us go through our presentation. And then after all 4 of us are done, if you have any questions of any of us, then I would appreciate you at that time you give us some questions. Mr. Larson, you're up.
Well, I think all of you know you're supposed to be third graders. That's who we talk to. That's who we go out on the road for. And we do have some special guests here that come a distance, all the way from Orange, California. My wife, she's from Tustin, and my grandchildren here, Allie and Jacob, and my son, David. So they came all that way. Anyway, at this time, usually I have all these students give a hand to their teachers and what they've done during the year. Now, we don't have the teachers here, so what I'm going to ask is that all the men give the ladies a good round of applause for all those breakfasts, all making bed, taking care of the kids, driving to get the groceries, taking them back and forth to school. So would you guys give those ladies a hand? All right. Okay. I'm going to have to give my electronic gal stage hand just a notice here for the next little bit. We'd kind of like to loosen the kids up to begin with. And what we'd like to do is, okay. What we do, one of the things we do with the kids is tell them that I like to generate electricity. And sometimes I find out that other people can generate electricity, by rubbing their hair, doing like this. And sometimes you do it long enough, you can create a light. Now, I don't know if I can do it again or not, but if you go around hard enough, you can create that light. And sometimes you can throw this light across the room. Okay, we're going to try that. This takes a little more generation, but I'm going to try. Okay. You want to set it back? Okay, I got it. And sometimes, I do so much that it goes out into the audience. You never know. So what I'm going to do is try to throw a little juice here, and see if somebody comes up with something. Okay, I'm generating, and I'm going to throw it. Anybody out there got it? Oh, there it is, there it is. Okay, good. Anyway, this is just to loosen up the kids a little bit. Now, we have one more thing, then I'll get into Irvine here. We're on a time schedule. So let me just show you one thing here. We find out that kids, most of them wash their hair in the morning, but not all of them, not all of them. So what we're going to do here, oh here it is here, what I'm looking for. I got a jug here, just a plain old brown jug. We call it a little brown jug. You know, some guys use the brown jug, and got a little water we put in here, and see if I can empty it out. I empty it out. And then I find out that I can go to some people and create a little more water. If he's washed his hair or this morning or last night or whatever, maybe we can get a little water out of that. Now, let's try another one. Let's see here if we can get any water here. I don't know, he probably hasn't washed his hair for a while. No. I know the girls wash their hair all the time. All the time. There's got to be a lot in that knot up there. So we'll check that out. Yeah, there it is. So anyway, that's the little brown jug. Now, I want to go ahead and talk about Irvine. Irvine. Of course, a lot of us lived here a long time. I've been here since about 1962. But anyway, most people know that the grants, the Spanish grants came here and got given away a lot of land, and I'm not going to go through all those people's names, but back in the 1500s they came in here, and then they got a little, about another 50 years, they got together the missionaries, and then they got together these missions and they started giving away a little of the land. Well, in the process, there were a lot of land out there, and we did have some buyers, but they started trying to create little cities around. But anyway, one of the big buyers, of course, was Irvine, Mr. Irvine. And Mr. Irvine got a lot of land. It started out with about 800 acres in Tustin, but then the cities got to say, well, we got all this land out here, we got to grow something. And Mr. Irvine said, yeah, I'm going to grow something. There had some started already. One of the first big crops was walnuts. They grew a lot of walnuts, but the problem with walnuts, it's hard to process it. You go out there and you got to shake that tree, you know, and get it out and run your tractor over maybe the nuts or whatever. But anyway, that is a big problem. So they got away with the nuts, oh, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years. And then they went to apricots. They had a lot of apricots, worked out pretty good. Apricots worked out pretty good. But then they decided, well, apricots still wasn't quite doing what they wanted. And you say, well, what about, did they have cattle? No, not much cattle. Although there was a Chicago meat guy that came out here and thought he could change this whole thing into raising cattle and processing meat and send it back to Chicago. But that didn't work out. That didn't work out. So anyway, finally, after a lot of different changes of apricots, oranges, and all those, but I'm going to say oranges. Oranges are the one that came in and stayed. Why did the oranges stay for the farmers? Well, it was a little bit easier to process, and they were in demand across the United States. So the Yup Company came in and started with the oranges. And of course, when I came out here back in '62, we had a lot of orange growth. But the orange groves finally went too. And why do you think the orange groves went out? Well, look at all those million-dollar homes on that hill, and you know why they went out. They were going to take that land and turn it into homes. So that's what they did. That's what they did. But anyway, eventually, of course, why did they come to Irvine and Orange County anyway? Number one, you had the great climate. Number two, you had great land. You had the great land. Number three, you had old sunshine all the time. Those three things brought a lot of them out here. And Mr. Irvine had to bring out a lot of farmers. He had a lot of farm to farm. So what did he do? He said, well, I think I know what I can do. I'm going to let those people back in Iowa and Minnesota and Missouri, they probably want some work. And when I got all this land sitting out here, there should be something planted on it. So he said, well, he put the word out there back in those Midwest states, and he said, well, you guys come out. I've got some housing for you. In fact, they still have some of that housing right on the ranch farm. If you go out to the ranch farm and the Wheeler Library there, it's great. They got some of the old equipment. They got the big barn and all that stuff. But anyway, he said, come on out. You plant the crop. I got the land. We'll split it 50-50. And so he did. He did get a lot of people to come out and do that. And so that helped him a whole lot. Now, water is a very big thing. If you don't have water, you're not going to have much. So what did Irvine do? Well, he decided, I got to create a lot of water for all these trees and plants and everything we're going to, and orange groves. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a channel up in those hills. And we're going to run water for miles. And has anybody gone on that tour of the Irvine channels of water? They don't have, right? They don't show that very often, but it's up there. It's up there. And so, and the next thing I asked the kids, well, does water run uphill? Does water run uphill? No. No. So all the kids say, no, water doesn't run uphill. Well, I told them, hey, I'm going to show you how water can run uphill. And Mr. Irvine on his ranch, he used that to create water for all the orange groves and everything else. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer. There he is right there. So come on up.
And I am 8 years old if you drop the 0.
Okay. I want to tell them who you are, where'd you go to high school, where were you born?
Born in Southgate.
Southgate.
Went to Southgate High.
Southgate High. Okay. Here's what you're going to do.
Yes.
You're going to hold that light like that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you see this picture up here? Irvine Ranch is out here. There's big reservoirs up there. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're up there. They got trees in front of them, so you don't see them unless you take a ride up there and you go around them. How many, you've seen them, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of them, and they're huge. They're huge. Well, we have to have water coming down here, so what we do, we have a reservoir. Here's the reservoir. And now, kids, we're going to show you how water can run uphill. This was used by the contractors on the Irvine Ranch to level out land. Notice, this level is the same as this level. So if he was to go way over to that wall, oh, that's good right there. I want you to stand here on the road in case because you might get wet. a little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, that's good. So anyway, they had a pile of dirt here and a pile of dirt here, and they had to level that out, and they had cement also. They do with cement. They have to have it level some places, and they had to have a little 3, 4, 5 degree fall for the water as it rained on the cement areas. So what they do, they take a simple hose like this, only a lot longer. They start shoveling and leveling off here. Another guy's leveling off that part. And then they have to, another guy is here with the hose, and he says, well, we're at this high right now we're at this high. So over there, they can say how high it has to go to be level with this. Now if they want the water to run like there, the Irvine farmers, then they say, well, it has to be a little bit lower. You take 2 inches off that. But anyway, we can see now here's water going uphill. And of course it just keeps going and going and going down. You don't want to hold it here, huh? Again, how's how that water go uphill? There it goes. So anyway, I thank you. You stay around a little bit. I got a little something special for you. Okay. As we tell those third graders, remember, water seeks its own level. You're gonna run into that when you're gonna have some of these rains we were having, and that water will seek its own level. Maybe sometimes it comes into some of the houses. So, anyway, we tell them again, that's what the Irvine Ranch is. Now, the Irvine Ranch, of course, is really a place that's known throughout the world. And if you haven't been, of course, we'd like to say come down to our museum also. We've got a lot of stuff down there that'll tell you about the Irvine and the ranch and everything. But if you haven't been out to the Wheeler Library, you should go out there. It's where they built that building like the old ranch was, except it's a library now, but it burned down. And, but they got a lot of neat, how many have been to that library out there? Almost all of you. I don't need to tell you guys. I'm talking to third graders now, you remember. So anyway, that's about it. And Joe, we're going to turn it back over to you. I think my time's up.
The Queen of Tustin.
Well, you're going to be very lucky because I'm going to sing to you. This is our theme song. Katie, beautiful Katie, you're the only good girl that I adore. When the moon shines over the cowshed, I'll be waiting at the kitchen door. Can't you imagine what romance was like when you had to wait until you were through with the cowshed to meet your girlfriend at the kitchen door? But this is the way it was with Katie. Katie lived on an orange grove, and this boyfriend who sang this song lived in the next orange grove. Katie did not go to concerts. Katie didn't go to college. All Katie did was get married and become a housewife, circa 1900. In those days, if you weren't married by the time you were 20, you were an old maid, and nobody wanted to be an old maid. So Katie got married when she was 16. She moved into the next orchard. She gathered eggs. She helped with the cows. Even though he did milk the cow, she did the milking. She cleaned the house. She cooked for him and for all the people who came to pick oranges in that orchard. Sometimes she'd have 15 or 20 migrant people that she had to cook for. This is what happened to Katie back in those days when Katie didn't go to college. Flash forward to 1942. 42? Some of us were around in 42. That was when you went to the market and you had ration books. You couldn't just buy food, you had to have ration coupons in addition to the money that you gave them. If you drove your car, you could only drive as far as school and back because they were rationing gasoline. Everything was being rationed. Well, I'll have to tell you my background. I don't tell the kids this because they wouldn't understand. I grew up on a big farm. My grandfather was the first person in California to start a TB sanatorium. Half of the sanatorium was the houses where the patients stayed. The other half was the farm where he raised all the food that they ate at the sanatorium. He had a dairy, he raised chickens, he had gardens, he had orchards. They had an orange orchard, an avocado orchard. They had grapefruit and lemons. Well, this was back in 1890s. My father grew up there. My brothers and sisters and I grew up on this farm. By the middle of the 30s, they were no longer having the dairy there. Everything was coming from the city by then. But when we first started out, we were 3 miles from town, and there was no way to get food into the place. Well, 1942 war. My father, who was a doctor, decided we weren't going to have any shortages. Everybody had shortage of meat and cream and butter and all these things. We were not going to have any shortages. And the way you didn't have a shortage of milk, butter, and cream was to get a cow. Well, who was going to milk the cow? There were 4 of us that were teenagers. The 4 of us looked around and decided that the best place to put the cow was in this orange orchard. We had a winter that was just like we've been having here this last couple of weeks, where it rained and rained and rained and the grass grew, and the grass was that tall in the orange orchard. So we dug post holes and we cut down limbs from the trees, put them in the post holes, strung barbed wire around the orange orchard, and got the cow. Well, we turned the cow loose in there to go and eat that beautiful tall green grass that had been growing. Cow, grass, grass. She discovered oranges. She started at the very bottom of the trees in those days went clear to the ground. She started at the bottom, ate every orange in every orange tree in this orchard. And when she was through eating the oranges, she ate the orange leaves. Can you imagine what the milk looked like? Orange Julius. We had to milk cow every day, twice a day, and dump out this milk because it was unusable, terrible. At least the first 4 months that we had the cow, we couldn't use the milk. Anyway, that's my story. Ask who milked the cow. I'll never tell.
Lori, our school teacher.
Hello, everybody. So when I'm giving the presentation to the 3rd graders, I ask them a lot of questions and ask them to raise their hand in response, and that kind of generates the information that I provide to them. So as Dawn said earlier, I'm expecting you to pretend like you're 3rd graders. You can either answer maybe your answer when you were a 3rd grader, or maybe if you have grandkids that are about that age and you know the answer that they would answer, you can raise your hand and answer that way. However you want, just as long as I see some hands. Okay, so I'll get started. So what I would do is, hi everyone, I want to introduce myself. My name is Miss Lori, and I'm going to tell you today what it was like to be either a student or a teacher over 100 years ago. So, raise your hand if you're wearing jeans today. A few people wearing jeans.
That's right. Earlier.
Is anybody wearing sneakers or tennis shoes or whatever you want to call them? Okay, we've got a few. Okay. Anybody have any like glittery, no glittery pink ones, right? No. Well, did you know that over 100 years ago, you could not wear any of that to school? And at that point, everybody just gasps. They can't believe that they couldn't wear sneakers or they couldn't wear jeans. And so I go on to tell them that the boys were always kind of dressed up. They always had long sleeve shirts and button-up shirts with a high collar, and probably their mom ironed them and starched them. They were probably a little uncomfortable, nowhere near as comfortable as the t-shirts or polo shirts that the students get to wear nowadays. And then I tell them that the girls always had to wear dresses, that girls never wore pants. And again, they can't believe that because most of the girls wear pants. So I tell them the girls wore kind of roughly dresses, again, especially around the 1900s, really high neck, lots of ruffles, again, probably stiff, probably kind of hard to play in. And then the shoes. Nobody wore sneakers, nobody had rubber-soled shoes or glitter shoes or things like that. They all wore leather shoes. And perhaps their shoes even had buttons that they had to try to button every morning. And the funny thing is that if you look at pictures of Tustin around the early 1900s, there are a fair amount of kids in these photos. They're, the class portrait that they take with the teacher in front of the school, and they're all kind of dressed up. There are quite a few kids not wearing any shoes. And I don't really know the explanation other than maybe their parents couldn't afford shoes. Because probably your clothes, mom could sew the clothes, mom could buy the fabric and sew the clothes and provide the clothes, but shoes, really difficult to make your own shoes. So I'm thinking that that was something that some families maybe weren't able to buy all the time. So if anybody has any insight, you can tell me afterwards if there's a better answer to that. And then I go on to ask the kids how they got to school that day. And it's always interesting to note the variation depending on which part of Tustin Unified we're presenting to. Different areas, the way the houses are or the apartments, they always have different answers. But I ask them, how did you get to school? And so, I say, raise your hand if you walked today. Anybody walk today? Steve walked today. Anybody ride their bike? Yeah, okay. Anybody get a ride from mom and dad? You guys must have all gotten a ride from mom and dad. Yes, that's the default answer. Okay, did anybody bring their horse and buggy today? And at that point they're like, what? And a lot of them don't even know what the word buggy really means. I have to explain to them that horse and buggy would be horse and a carriage, and that if you had siblings, that's how you all got to school at the same time. You would all ride in the carriage together. And then I tell them that they would have to go to school early. In fact, I know that my grandmother and my great uncle and my great aunts, who all grew up in Tustin, would have to go to school early because they came with the horse and buggy. They'd have to allow time to unhitch the horse because there was a stable right next to the school, and that's where they would keep their horse during school time. So they'd unhitch the horse, give it some food and water, tether it so it didn't walk away, and then go on to school. And the way the stable was located, it actually helped separate the playground. It was right next to the playground, and I tell the kids that at that time, the boys and the girls were segregated and could not play together. There was actually a fence running down the middle of the playground. And then I asked the kids about their backpacks. They love to tell me what color their backpack is. So raise your hand if you have a blue backpack. Anybody have a blue backpack? Nobody has a blue. Pete has a blue backpack. How about a pink or purple? And that's a lot of hands usually go up. Pink or purple. I ask if anybody has a rolling backpack. Some schools, yeah, there are a few people with rolling backpacks. Some of them are like, no, we've never heard of a rolling backpack with wheels. And then I tell them that the kids in the 1900s did not have backpacks. And again, they can't believe it. And then I tell them that the way they carried their books were either in their arms or maybe they had, it's kind of like a strap, like a book strap that was like a belt, like a leather belt basically that just went around the books. and allowed you to carry the strap, and it was a little more convenient than holding the books in your arms. But they can't believe that nobody had backpacks. And then I asked them, you know, what about your lunchbox? And everybody's got, you know, the soft-sided insulated lunchbox with all the zippers and the straps and stuff like that. And then I asked them if they've heard of a lunch pail, that expression. And some of them, yeah, lunch pail, that sounds familiar. And I tell them that lunch pail goes to the fact that they used to be pails, that people used to bring their lunch to school in like a metal pail. And I tell them that there were no such things as Ziploc bags or anything like that, that they would have to wrap their food up in cloth and put it in the little bucket and bring it to school that way. And yeah, I think they really appreciate what they have today when they hear that. And then I go on and talk about the teachers, because you know, there's usually 2, sometimes 3 classes there. And so the teachers are on the side of the room listening. And so the kids love to kind of answer some questions about their teachers. So I ask the kids, you know, raise your hand if you've ever seen your teacher wear jeans. All the hands go up. What about a t-shirt or a sweatshirt? Yeah, lots of hands go up. And everybody, you know, the teacher's kind of looking at what they're wearing and, you know, kind of look a little sheepish. And then I say, you know, what about sandals when it's warm weather? Yeah, lots of, you know, hands go up. Anybody have long hair and, you know, the teacher wears it down? Yeah, lots of hands go up. And then I tell them that teachers could not wear any of that 100 years ago. And I tell them that basically teachers would dress like I'm dressed today. So a high collar, maybe some jewelry. If I had long hair, it would be up in a bun, but mine's not long enough. Long skirts, definitely, and then leather shoes. And in fact, I read something recently. There were school rules for teachers from the 1915 was the date on these regulations. One of the rules was skirts could be no shorter than 2 inches above your ankles. So my skirt is probably just barely making the requirement. And you also had to wear 2 petticoats. That was another requirement. So yeah, I found a very interesting list. I'll share a little bit more from that list in a minute. But then, yeah, they're surprised that, you know, teachers were a lot more formal way back then. And then I asked them, well, you know, do your teachers have a family? Are they married? Do they have kids? Do they live in a house or a condo apartment nearby? And you know, yeah, everybody, you know, nods their head. And I tell them, did you know that over 100 years ago, teachers in the Tustin area could not get married? And in fact, that was kind of common across the US. Restrictions that did not allow at least female teachers, and I'm not sure what they did with male teachers, but female teachers could not be married. And I know that Benjamin Beswick, you guys probably all know that name, and know that at one point he owned the Hughes house, where Linda Jennings lives now, and he was adamant that the teachers in the Tustin School District really needed to live in Tustin. So he changed some of the rooms on the 2nd floor to make them into boarding rooms so the teachers could stay there and pay him rent. And he required all of his teachers to live in his house. And that way he could keep a real eye on them, watch what they're doing in the evenings, making sure that you know, they're working on their lesson plans, making sure that they were appropriate over the weekend. You know, they did everything they were supposed to do. I don't mention it to the kids now, but it is interesting that he made all the teachers attend his local church. And so, you know, everything on the weekend, he really kept an eye on these teachers. And along that line, as I said, I found this document online that talks about being a teacher in the 1915s, and basically these rules of this teaching contract. And this was in like the Sacramento area, so Northern California. And again, the teachers could not be married. The teachers could not ride in a carriage or a car with a man unless it was their brother or their father. They could not loiter in downtown at the ice cream shops, which is kind of interesting. Ice cream shops must have been a little different. They could not leave the city unless they had permission from the chairman of the board. They had to be in by 8 p.m. They could not be out after 8 p.m. So between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. they needed to be in the house unless there was a school function. So yeah, very, very interesting how things have changed in, only about 100 years. So yeah, some of that I haven't shared with the kids, but I thought you guys would find that interesting. And yeah, so I do tell the kids, I said, imagine if your teacher had to live in your principal's house, and the principal was watching the teachers all the time to see what they were doing. And yeah, everybody becomes a little uncomfortable at that point. I can tell that students think it's a little weird, and the teachers are trying to imagine it and thinking, oh my gosh, no, I wouldn't want that. And then we talk about technology. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the kind of technology that the students in Tustin Unified have nowadays. But the 5th graders get iPads. The 3rd graders, who we're giving our presentations to, have iPads available. I think they have iPads that they share between other classes. So they might use the iPads like every couple days, maybe for a little bit of time every day, but they don't keep it, they don't take it home with them. And so yeah, they nod their heads, yeah, they use iPads. And I ask them if they have a smart board in their room, and most of the schools in Tustin Unified use a smart board. And I don't know if you guys have seen them, but they're really quite interesting. It looks kind of like a big dry erase board because it's a big white board on the wall, but you do not write on it with a pen like you would a dry erase board. It's basically like a huge touch screen, like a huge computer touch screen. So it is linked up with the teacher's computer, which is on her desk. And so, she can bring up any document or a PowerPoint that she's prepared or anything, and it will show up on the board, at the front of the classroom for all the students to be able to see it. And then if she's, talking and wants to, write something impromptu on the board, she's got what kind of looks like a pen, but it's just electronic, like a stylus, I heard somebody say, and she can write on the board, and it is digitally being written. It's not actual ink that is coming up on the board, but it looks kind of like that, where with the smart board she can write anything she wants and it comes up. And so they all answer that, yeah, smart boards, and we talk about that. And then I ask them, well, do you want to see what the early version of an iPad looked like, over 100 years ago, what an iPad looked like? And yeah, they all want to see what an iPad looked like over 100 years ago. And then I show them this. And some of them don't actually know what it is. I have to explain that it's a chalkboard and you have to write on it with chalk. And that at that time, penmanship was really important, and anything you wrote, you had to write with your hand. You didn't have a keyboard, you didn't type, you didn't have a computer, and that's all kind of new to them. And then I talk about, well, what does your teacher do if they want some information, or if the students want some information, they want to look up something? Most of them say Google. They get on the iPad, they type it into Google, and instantly get a whole load of information about whatever obscure topic they want to research. And I tell them that over 100 years ago, this is the type of thing that you would find. This is Teachers and Pupils Cyclopedia, and I don't know why it's not an encyclopedia, but it's a cyclopedia. And this is volume 3. There's actually 4 volumes in this set, and this is getting pretty old, but this is the type of information. It's just mostly text. There's some drawings in there, but not a lot. No colored photos, no nothing like that. And the fact that they only had 4 of these And that was the extent of the information that they had available. You know, nothing compared to Google and the internet nowadays. And yeah, so I just kind of, make that association of what technology was like over 100 years ago, and I really can't believe it. So that's basically the presentation that I give them to tell them what it was like to be a student or a teacher over 100 years ago. And then we usually go on and have questions afterwards. But right now we have Joe.
And to follow what Lori is talking about, you'll notice that we don't have a digital screen, we don't have remotes, we don't have a needlepoint, we don't have iPads. We're doing it it was like 150 years ago. So I'm glad Lori brought all that up. And for some of you, I remember a lot of the things that she was talking about. I never rode a horse, but anyway. First Pennsylvania, Laudatory, Battery B, Sprecklemeyer. I noticed the way I did the salute, the palm is out. It's not this way, it is this way. The salute came about from King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Whenever the king wanted to inspect the knights, he would line the knights up on their horses. And as the king rode by, the knight would lift the face guard up so that the king could see his face. And as he rode by, he'd drop the face guard back into place. And that's how the salute came about. English, in the Spanish-American War, here in the United States, the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, and the First War, we all saluted this way. And then when it got to be World War II, all these different countries fighting one country, they decided, let's change our salute. So the American salute became this way, the palm down. The English still salute this way. And of course, the Germans salute this way. One thing I would like to say about slavery, that's when I'm talking to the kids, the third graders, and see, asking them what is slavery, and a lot of them don't actually know what the word means. And I talk about this is, of course, the United States. We live right here. And this is the Mason-Dixon line. And this is the North and this is the South during the Civil War between 1861 and 1865. Columbus-Tustin, during the 1860s, there was a drought in this area. And of course, in 1865 is when the Civil War ended. But the drought was still here. And the rancheros, we had a dozen or so rancheros here in Orange County, and because of the drought, they raised cattle, and because of the drought, the cattle were dying. What they had for water, they didn't have wells, they didn't know how to dig a well. They had ponds. And every year the pond, from rain, the pond would fill with water, and the cattle would have something to drink. Well, during the drought, all that disappeared. So losing the cattle means they lost their income. Rancheros, they had spent so much money on horses and furniture and houses, they hadn't saved a lot of money, so in order to pay their bills, they had to start selling the land. So that's when Columbus-Tustin says, oh, what's going on here? After the Civil War, most of the battles were fought in this part of the country. After the Civil War, there were a lot of people that didn't want to live here anymore. Their houses were destroyed. Their farms were destroyed. There was no jobs. Manufacturing was gone. Restoration took a long time after the Civil War. So with a lot of land grants and gold being in California, people started moving west. And that was during the 1860s. And that's when Columbus Tustin and Mr. Stratford, who bought the land for Santa Ana, they thought it would, Columbus Tustin was up in this area. He was a carriage builder. So he decided to buy land here because people, when they were traveling by covered wagon, the easiest trail was to come south because it was warmer, the climate was better, the conditions were better. So a lot of people started to end up in Southern California, so that's why. And when Columbus Tustin heard that the rancheros were selling their property, okay, why not? So that's when he bought property down here and moved us down here in 1868. And of course, Tustin has become a proud little town. I'm very proud of Tustin. Now another thing about slavery, when you talk to the third graders, you know, I tell them, you know, when you go to the store, you can buy clothes. When you go to the store, you can buy food. You can go to the store and buy toys. But before the Civil War, there were stores where you could buy people. And that always seems to get their attention. What? Yeah, you could. Let's all assume that you are here in a store, and I'm a plantation owner, and I need slaves to pick my cotton, which was in the South. You know, the biggest industry was cotton. So you're all here. You're all slaves, and I'm going to buy one of you, and I'm going to buy a couple of you. Matter of fact, and I'm going to take you home with me. And when I take you home with me, you're going to make my bed. You're going to wash my clothes. You're going to clean my toilets. And then you'll tell me, well, when's my pay? Well, how much do I get paid? No, I bought you. You're like a piece of furniture. I bought you. And then they will say, well, what about how about going on vacation? No, I'm not going to give you money to go on a vacation. So why, you know, there's no reason for you to leave. Well, what about school? No, I don't want you to go to school. Because if you go to school, you might become smarter than me. And I don't want that. So, and then you kind of get an idea what the kids begin to realize what slavery means. And then I'm going to say, well, okay, what I want to do is I'm going to buy this gentleman here for $250, and I'm going to drive this lady right here for $250. Why am I buying this couple? Because I want them to marry and have children, so I don't have to keep buying slaves. So anyway, that kind of sinks home for a lot of the kids. So that kind of gives me the goosebumps anyway. I belong to an artillery group, reenactment. I haven't been with it for a number of years, but I used to, for about 10 years, I was doing reenactments all throughout Southern California. And this is an ordnance rifle. And it's this wheel right here. If I stand up next to it, the wheel comes to right around here. And it was pulled by horses. And there's a couple of, to me, during the Civil War, there were some unsung heroes, women. There were women who actually dressed up. They would bound themselves tightly around the top, and then they would wear men's clothes and make like that they were young men. And they actually fought in battles. And then, but then the women also who became nurses, and the women who tried to take care of the sick, I mean the people who were hurt. And another unsung hero to me was the horse. Andrew Jackson, one of the famous guy, the Confederate guy that used to fight one battle one day, and 50 miles later, and the next morning he would be fighting another battle 50 miles away. The reason what he did is with his cavalry, they would ride their horses all night long, and the cavalry knew how to sleep while riding the horse. But when they got to the battle site and they did a surprise attack, the cavalry guy was ready to go, but the horse hadn't slept, and hadn't been drinking, and hadn't been fed, and they didn't respond the way they did their best they could. And the main thing about a cavalry was to shoot the horse first, because it was the bigger target. So if the horse was shot, then the cavalry guy could hide behind the horse for protection. So a lot of, again, unsung heroes. I have something over here in the corner. I have a muzzle loader, and I talked to Gary about it before bringing it here. And he said, well, let me talk to the Tustin police first. So he talked to him to get the okay, and he said, all right, bring the gun. So this muzzle loader was used by my great-grandfather, John Sprecklemeyer. He was born in 1826 in Hanover, Prussia. He fought in the Franco-Prussian War in the 1850s. And then he migrated to the United States, was in Maryland for a while, and he ended up in Coon Station, Kentucky. And then with this gun, he fought in the Civil War. This is a smoothbore muzzle loader, and this was the kind of gun that they used back when Napoleon would say, okay, gentlemen, there will be two lines. You will march towards the enemy, and when you're about 50 yards away, you will stop. The line in front will kneel down, while the guys, the line in the back would remain standing. And this is where the ready, aim, fire came from. So they wanted this all in unison. So the commander would say, ready. So they would actually bring the gun up, aim. Now there's no sight on this thing for lining up for a bullseye. No, it was just you aimed it for something and you hoped you would hit it. And then what they would do. And of course they had to be cocked. And then you would aim, and you would look at your enemy. And then when he said fire, you would close your eyes and pull the trigger. The reason you close your eyes is because the percussion cap here would create smoke. And it would get in your eyes. It was important not to, during the middle of a battle, not to have smoke in your eyes. So what happened? Then, once I fired the gun after kneeling down at the enemy 50 yards away, I was lucky if I hit anybody at 50 yards. Because the bullet, when it comes out, it's like a knuckleball. And a knuckleball, when you play baseball, the knuckleball, it doesn't spin, but it dances around. And that's just what happened with the bullet when it came out of the end of the gun here. It would dance around. At 50 yards, if you could, maybe 1 out of 5 times, you would hit a target there maybe the big as the size of a trash can lid. You just hoped, hopefully you were going to hit something. Then after you had fought, you were kneeling down and you fired a gun, then you stood up and the line behind you, they knelt down in front of you, and they were getting ready to fire. While they were getting ready to fire, you're loading your gun. You couldn't load this gun lying down on the ground. You couldn't hide behind a tree and kneel down and load this gun. You had to stand up. You had to pour the powder in, plug it, put in the mini ball. Now a lot of people think the mini ball is that way because it's smaller than a cannonball. But mini, it's Manet. Manet was a Frenchman who created that kind of a bullet. But everybody says, okay, it's a mini ball. It's small. No, it was named after Manet. So you load your gun here, and then when it was then you were ready. Then you reached your turn, and you went and knelt down, and you were ready, aim, fire, close your eyes. Now, in the middle of the Civil War is when the rifling came about. And then with the Henrys and the Sharps, the rifling, the bullet could go 700 to 1,000 yards, much farther than this, and was more accurate. That's when they developed the sniper. Snipers came about during the middle of the Civil War. And I told my son, I had dinner with my son tonight, and I said, I'm going to be talking about this, and you know you're going to get this. And he says, yeah, no, Dad, I know you're going to. A couple more things is that when those guys were fighting like Napoleon, the guys kneeling down, the guys standing, the commander would say, always face the enemy. The reason being is if you got hit, it would go through the thinner part of your body. If you turned this way and you got hit, it would go through the wide part of your body and create more damage. So I can't believe how brave those guys at 50 yards apiece, firing at each other, standing there facing the enemy like this. It just took more courage than I can imagine. And then with the rifling, then guerrilla war came about. Then they could hide behind something. They could hide behind a tree. They could kneel down and hide behind a boulder. It's a different kind. It was chainsaw kind of a different. They did a different war. This is what they ate off of at the beginning of the war. They didn't have plates to feed the soldiers. They would put the food onto. They would take a plank and cut it into squares. This is where the term square meal comes from. This is haversack. Back in at the beginning of the Civil War, they had all their belongings rolled up into a blanket. They rolled it up and then tie a rope to the end of it, and then they would carry it around their shoulders. Well, in time, they started giving them these sacks. So they wheeled up to a wagon with a bunch of these sacks, and the guy on the wagon was saying, "Have a sack." And the guy on the ground says, "What's he saying?" And he said, "Well, I think he's saying haversack." And that's how the term came. It is a military term that is used today, haversack. That's what this bag is. What I ate with, this is I show this to the kids, and this comes apart. This is my knife. This is my fork. This is my spoon. It all fits together like this. And I keep it in my haversack. I also have in here a little bag. It's the housewife. It's called because the little bag has needle and thread and buttons. The uniform that you got at the beginning of the war, there were no uniforms. It was the farm clothes they wore. And half of the Confederacy, they were barefooted anyway. But once they started getting uniforms, this is pretty much what you had for the rest of the war. You fought in it, you slept in it, and you generally slept in your uniform because if there was a surprise attack that early morning, you wanted to be ready to go. You don't want to take time to put your clothes on. You got to be ready to go as soon as possible. Okay, I could keep going on and on.
Thank you very much.
One last thing I tell the kids, when you grow up and be a success, I would like for you to thank a teacher because a teacher helps you somewhere along the way. Thank you for coming.